very much. It's a real honour to be here today and a privilege. And to be honest, I didn't expect to be here. At this point in my life, I thought that I would either be serving a long-term prison sentence or simply wouldn't be here at all. The title of my talk is How Hunting Can Save the World, and I know that it's a bold and provocative statement. But it's something that I believe in the very core of me and in my bones. And the reason I believe it is because of my experience of hunting throughout my life. So how hunting can save the world, but how it can also heal it and how it's healed me. As a child, I was surrounded by crime and violence. There were weapons in the house to protect my father and us, his family, from the outside forces that wanted to come in through our doors, either through battering rams or through other sneaky little ways. And this was from two forces, from one force which were the criminals that he did business with and often fell out with, and they wanted something from him, or there was some kind of disagreement, or the police who wanted him off the streets and in a cell for the crimes that he'd committed and the laws that he'd broken. So there were men who wanted him either hurt or in the ground, and there were men and women who also wanted him in a cell. And this for me was a constant sense of fear and threat and danger. The hooded claw outside the door that wanted to come in and take my father away from me and to break our world apart. So for me there was a sense of being hunted, and I lived in London in the 70s, and it's not a place that you would expect hunting to happen, but human on human hunting was going on all the time, and it was going on around me. And with these battering rams that were crashing in through our doors on a regular basis, there was a breaking down for me and a retreat from the world. That the world was a threatening place for me, was a frightening place, and that the man that I looked up to and idolised and adored, for all the love that he gave me and all the affection and all the learning that he gave me, he couldn't keep me safe. And so with that lack of safety, I became an island and shut myself off from other human beings. The place that I felt safe and the place that I felt I could go to for solace and healing and some kind of peace was nature. Nature was always a force that never let me down, never judged me, as long as I respected it and didn't go out in too crazy weather conditions. Climbing up in trees, sitting by rivers, going to the ocean, that was the place that I felt that I really belonged. So these raids on the house continued until finally at the age of 12 my father was arrested and he was given a long-term custodial sentence. So although he wasn't fully present because of the fear that he was experiencing and the sense of predation that he had all the time, he was now removed from me physically. So I had my stepmother and I had my mother around and they looked after me, but my father, the one that I really looked to, was gone. So I started looking for a father myself. Now I'd learned how to manipulate, I'd learned how to get what I needed at a very young age, and I thought, well, I'm going to go on my own particular kind of hunt here, and I'm going to go and look for a father because my physical father isn't here. I visited him in prison on a regular basis, but he wasn't there to give me even some semblance of protection. And unfortunately at that point there was another man who was looking for me in the guise of being a father, but he wasn't. He had other designs on me, and I found out what those designs were, and I thought that the exchange that I made with him, which was giving him my innocence, was a fair exchange for what I needed so desperately. I needed that mentoring and I needed that holding. And a few months after that I came out of this experience having realised that I'd been seduced and been duped at the age of 12, and became enraged and thought, men cannot be trusted. I can't be trusted to be kept safe. I can't be trusted for people to not come into our home by violence or violent means, and I certainly can't be kept safe from other men who wanted to predate on me in this way. So I got into taking drugs at a very young age. My father came in and out of prison many times until eventually he came out and we started doing drugs together. And this was a way that I experienced an intimacy with my father that was twisted and dysfunctional, but it was an intimacy. We shared a connection in the wee small hours of the night in the middle of London. We started dealing drugs together to make money, and very soon we were watched, we were being hunted once more, and we were arrested. And he was looking at a long-term sentence, which he got, and I was also looking at a long-term sentence, but he wrote a letter to the judge saying, whatever you do to me, do it, but please don't put him down because he won't survive prison, which I knew I wouldn't. So I was released to go into a drug rehab, and went into addiction and alcohol recovery, which I've been in now since 1988 successfully. So chemicals are not part of my life in that way anymore. But addiction has remained part of my life, very much so. And I became addicted to work, became addicted to getting recognition from the world and adulation so that in some way I could feel better about myself, which it never really did the trick. I always had this sense that there was something broken in me. There was something that had just, a fuse had blown, that was never going to be repaired. And it also went into relationships or non-relationships, to women, seeking pleasure from women to, again, to get affirmation and to give some kind of solace, to numb the pain and the fear and the shame that I felt of who I was as a human being. And during this time I was approached, I'd always written as a young man, as a child, I'd always written stories, and I went on to write. My father had written as well, which is I got some of the inspiration from. And I became successful and got recognition, and I got invited to work in the prison system, to work with young men who had come from a similar position, a similar place in society as myself. And there was a connection. I told them where I'd come from, and immediately they felt that I was somebody that they could trust because I'd come through something and come out it to some extent the other end relatively unscathed. So the workshops were successful, but still there was this sense in me that something wasn't right. I had this constant Gollum voice going on, you know, that kind of breaking down and saying you're useless, whatever you do, you can't do enough, and you don't really have a right to be here. And a few years into my recovery from alcohol and drug addiction, my father came out from prison for the last time, and he was a broken man. He'd spent a lot of time inside, he'd become institutionalized, and he basically did the ultimate predator act, took himself out, took his own life as a result of the shame that he felt at who he was and the life that he'd given me. And again, that made me retreat one step further back from human connection, but I continued with the nature connection, and I continued working, and I continued trying and striving through my writing and through working with people and through talking to people to make the connection. I wanted to bridge the gap, but I still felt that there was something that just didn't say to me that I was okay to be here on this earth. At the age of 30, I was invited by my brother to go on a Rites of Passage weekend. This was going from what they call boy psychology to man psychology. I was 30 years old, but I'd been looking in the mirror until this point, looking at an adult, seeing an adult face, but feeling like a child, feeling like a boy or a teenager, and being really confused about what that was. And at the end of this extraordinary weekend where I was held and went through the dark night of the soul and dealing with demons and healing wounds and transformation and having all of that witnessed, at the end of this weekend I was standing in a room of men I'd only just met. And I realised that these are men that I could trust with my life. These are men that I would trust, and I knew that they would come to me and help me at any point. Men I just met. And for me, till that point, I'd never been able to trust another man fully. Even my friends who I was close to, there was always something holding back. And in that moment, at the age of 30, the question came in my mind was, where was this for me when I was 12, 13, 14, 15, 16? Where was it? Because it wasn't around for me. I knew what rites of passage were, I understood the meaning, but rites of passage were things that had happened to me forcefully. This was a rite of passage that I'd stepped into. And I thought in that moment, this is something that I could bring to the young men that I work with. So we started working to get young men out of prison on licence to come up to Dartmoor, where I live, to have an experience where we could share writing together, time around the fire, eating food, cooking food, sharing stories, and going for walks and experiencing a community for the time that we were together. And we had these residentials, and they were extraordinary experiences. I could see that these men were trusting me and the other men that I was working with. But there was still something that wasn't quite right, still something that wasn't quite hitting the mark. I still felt I was still struggling with the relationships, particularly with women, and I wanted to have a family. I wanted to make that connection, and I strived and I strived and I worked so hard, but still couldn't quite make it, still couldn't quite bridge the gap. I eventually got into a long-term relationship and stayed in that for quite a few years. But that relationship came to an end, and in the ending of that relationship, I thought, I can't do this. For some reason, this is it. I'm just going to have to stay single. I'm going to have to continue the work that I do and just carry on with what I've got. And in that sense of failure and brokenness, I took myself to where I always took myself, which was to nature. I went to the South Devon coast, to East Poole, where there were a group of friends who were camping in a wild spot. And during that week, what they were doing was they were hunting and they were foraging for the food that they would eat that week. Now, hunting for me was something I was very familiar with, human-on-human hunting, and me being a predator on other people getting what I needed or what I thought I needed, but always taking too much. But hunting for an animal in its own environment that I would take out of that environment and I would eat was a whole other level for me and something I'd never done. So one morning I was given a spearfishing outfit. Never been spearfishing. I was given a wetsuit and a spear gun and fins and invited to enter the ocean, which was very close to us. And I entered the ocean, and it was a beautiful blue sky day, crystal clear water, and I was also invited to say a prayer before I actually went on a hunt, to say a prayer to nature. Now, I have a spiritual practice, but I was rather cynical about this, so I said it reluctantly. And within a few short moments after this prayer, this extraordinary creature appeared on the seafloor beneath me. Shouldn't have been out at that time of day. It was a lobster that was just under 2 feet long from the tip of its claws to the tip of its tail, and I found out later it was probably 70 to 80 years old. And there was real fear in my chest, beating, because I knew that this was going to be the first time that I was actually, as a man, going to hunt for my food. I released the spear from the gun and put it through the lobster and felt immediate distress and confusion. It wasn't something that sat comfortably with me. There was no machismo, there was no, let's take this out and be a trophy and hold it up. There was confusion. And I took it to the shoreline, feeling a mixture of shame and pride. And people were coming along the beach towards me, and I thought I was going to get shouted at for taking this extraordinary creature from the ocean, from its environment. But that didn't happen. There was silence and there was awe at the size of this and the magnificence of this creature. And I wanted to kill it as quickly as possible, but I didn't know how to do it. I hadn't thought that through and was cursing myself for that. And at that moment, a woman appeared from behind me, barefoot, who was a chef, knew exactly what to do. And I killed this animal, saying another prayer, took it back to the camp, cooked it, and ate it. And in that moment, there was a connection with the people that I was with that I hadn't felt. I'd felt really separate from them because there were families there were children, all the things that I wanted wasn't there, and it was just compounding my sense of failure and my sense of loss. But in that, I knew that there was a connection between what had just happened and the confusion that I felt and the connection to human beings that I hadn't experienced before. And I continued to do this over the weeks and months and continued to find it difficult. Hunting with a spear gun in this country and with a rod and line in the ocean is something you can do legally. Other hunting you need licenses for. So this is what I did. And in the process of this hunting, I started to experience something and understand a word that I'd heard many times but had never really fully got. And that word was empathy. I started to understand and started to connect to the impact of what it was, to the animals that I was taking, to the human beings that I was impacting with my behaviour, with my sense of shame about who I was. And the empathy increased, and I thought this is another level of rites of passage of support that these young men can have, potentially. So we got a group of young men out of prison, took them to the same spot, gave them a rod and line, and very quickly a young man caught a small fish. And he came out like a child at Christmas, holding it up, and was just about to whack it on a rock. And we got him to stop. And everybody stopped. And we said, if you're going to kill this, we want you to do it quickly, cleanly, and with respect. And when you do, you're going to cook it and you're going to eat it. That's what we do here. And if you don't want to do that, then this isn't going to happen. And this young man who was 17 years old, he stopped and he looked down and he made a connection with the animal that was on the rock beneath him. And I knew the connection and the recognition that I could see on his face because I'd felt it. But for him, it had happened quickly. It had taken me many months. He went through the process, he killed it, cooked it, and he ate it in silence. And he came back to us at the end of the day and he said something had happened to him in that moment. He said that he had understood the impact of his violent crimes on his victims, which were many. And he felt remorse, and he felt compassion, and he felt a sense of shame, which he was familiar with when we discussed that, but a shame that he thought that maybe he could heal with this new understanding. So we continue to do this with the young men from the prison. We continue to take them hunting and continue to experience the same thing time and time again, the same connection to nature, which they hadn't experienced. Their connection to nature was very, very minimal, if at all. Their connection to each other, their connection to us, what they were sharing around the fire, and then they would go back to their communities and they would come back and give us extraordinary stories of different kinds of communication with their family, sharing at levels with emotions that they hadn't shared before. Some of them were moved to tears. These are young men who were, in the absence of rites of passage, were going out into the world and initiating themselves through violence on their communities in many, 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 many guises. We also used archery, and we used target archery and replica animals in a woodland setting to give them the same experience, and although it took longer for them to have that impact, the same thing happened. So for me, hunting is not necessarily something you have to do in terms of taking something's life, but just in having an awareness of how you hunt, what you hunt. Do you hunt mindlessly or mindfully? Do you do it consciously or unconsciously? And they got a consciousness, they got an awareness. And in being around me and other men like me who had been through that process, they felt that these were men that they could trust, because they were not men that they could trust in their communities, which is why they took it upon themselves to do this. And this was a dangerous and violent act, and we can see it happening all over the world. These young men who were not held and not given their birthright at the ages of 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, not given the transition into adulthood that can change from boy psychology into male man psychology, into an adult, responsible, productive member of society. And that fire that was lit for me in that room with those other men was kindled to embers when I started to realise the impact and the changes and the transformations that were happening to these young men. It's said that in certain tribes in Africa, that when a young person's committed a crime, the elders and the people of that community take them and they raise them above their head and they celebrate them. They give them a blessing. And my piece is that I didn't have a blessing as a young man, and these young men have not been blessed and honoured for who they are. They have been castigated, they have been shamed, they have been rejected for what they do. They're a wild energy that needs to be contained, and they're looking for that wild energy. They're looking to us to contain them, to give them the rite of passage that is their birthright. Last night I was been given a lift by a friend, a young man who works for an organisation, and he's in his early 20s, and he gave me a blessing. He gave me a blessing because he's gone through his own rite of passage. He knows what it is to be blessed and to be honoured and to be brought into his community. He gave me, a man of 48 years old, a blessing that touched my heart. So my invitation to you as an audience today, a challenge even, is to ask yourselves where and how you hunt, who you hunt. Do you do this consciously or unconsciously? And who in your community, which young men do you see need blessing? Which young men do you see that need to be brought in, out of the cold, into the warmth of our hearts, and given love and affection and challenge and boundaries, which they do need? So my question to you is not looking to other people to what can be done, but what can you do? And with that, I believe that the consciousness and the awareness of hunting and how we do it, whether we kill or we don't for animals or for food, is one way that we can save and potentially heal our world. Thank you.